The hardest choices require the strongest wills.
In 2018, a fictional alien committed genocide, and half the internet spent a week quietly wondering if he might have actually had a point. Not about the killing, per se, but about the logic behind it. That's the thing about Thanos that nobody really wants to sit with. His argument isn't stupid. I mean, resources are finite, populations grow. Unchecked consumption does collapse systems. The math isn't wrong. The problem, rather, is what he does with the math. He doesn't present his case to anyone. He doesn't seek consensus. He doesn't explore alternatives. He decides, alone, in silence, with the quiet certainty of someone who has mistaken his own conviction for cosmic mandate, that he, in fact, knows better, that the burden of the impossible choice falls to him, that his willingness to bear that weight is itself proof he should. Now, why does that pattern, the lone savior who decides for everyone, keep appearing in human history? Why it's so seductive? Why does it so consistently ends in catastrophe? And what clinical psychology can tell us about the specific wound that produces it? Because Thanos is not an alien anomaly. He is an archetype, and the savior complex he embodies isn't fiction. It's one of the most recognizable and most dangerous psychological patterns in human behavior. So we're going to take it apart. Here we'll explore Carl Jung on the shadow, Freud on the death drive, Adler on inferiority and overreach, Erich Fromm on why people surrender their freedom to someone who promises them certainty, Hannah Arendt on how genocide becomes mere arithmetic, not as mere hollow buzzwords, but as substantive forensic tools. Because if you can understand how Thanos got there, you'll never look at a self-appointed savior the same way again. So first, let's be precise about what makes Thanos different. He doesn't cackle. He doesn't want power for its own sake. Or at least, he's convinced himself he doesn't. He speaks of balance, of sacrifice, of a universe choking on its own excess. When he tells Loki, "I know what it's like to lose, to feel so desperately that you're right, yet fail nonetheless," he means it. He isn't performing grief. He lives in it. That's the savior complex in its purest form. Not the hero who rescues with permission, not the reformer who builds consensus, but the figure who decides alone, with a heavy heart and good conscience, that he must bear the moral burden of doing what no one else has the strength to do. Sound familiar? It should. History is full of them. Ideologues who starved millions for the purity of an idea. Technocrats who calculated the acceptable death toll for the glory of progress. Parents who broke their children's spirits simply for their own good. Leaders who suspended democracy to protect it. All of them certain. All of them weary. All of them convinced that their willingness to do the terrible thing was proof of their fitness to do it. The savior complex isn't about evil intentions. That's precisely what makes it so hard to spot in others and in ourselves. But before we get to Thanos' specific wound, we need to understand the psychological shape of the Savior-Tyrant itself, because Jung mapped this archetype decades before Marvel put a gauntlet on it. Carl Jung argued that the human psyche isn't a unified whole. It's a constellation of forces, many of them unconscious. The shadow is the part we repress, our anger, our selfishness, our hunger for control, our capacity for cruelty, the parts we'd rather not claim. Jung's warning was that unacknowledged shadow doesn't disappear. It projects, it finds a host, and at the collective level, it finds an archetype, a recognizable character who embodies what a whole civilization refuses to see in itself. Thanos is that archetype, the Savior-Tyrant. He embodies something civilization whispers to itself in its darkest moments. If we could just remove the weak, the excessive, the chaotic, then we could be clean, safe, balanced. When you feel that flicker of uncomfortable recognition watching him, you're not agreeing with genocide. You're recognizing a disowned part of yourself. The part that has, in a moment of genuine overwhelm, thought, if I could just cut away what's broken, maybe then things would be okay. Thanos externalizes that thought, gives it armor and an infinity gauntlet. That's why he's terrifying, and that's why he's fascinating. Jung shows us the shape of the psychology. Freud shows us what's powering it underneath. Freud proposed that the psyche runs on two competing drives: eros, the drive toward life, connection, creation, and thanatos, the death drive, an unconscious pull toward stillness, order, the reduction of tension, toward an end to the relentless, exhausting unpredictability of being alive. The name isn't a coincidence. Look at what Thanos actually wants, not conquest. He abandons his throne after the snap, not worship. He retires to a farm. What he wants is quiet, the cessation of a noise he's been hearing for decades, the grinding, chaotic, unmanageable hum of a universe that won't hold still. His superego, his moral conscience, isn't gentle, it's absolute. Balance is his law, and he enforces it with the ferocity of someone whose conscience has swallowed everything else. But beneath that rigid morality, the death drive is running the calculation. Reduce, have, still. Freud would say, Thanos isn't trying to save life. He's trying to end the anxiety of life's unpredictability. The snap isn't an act of love. It's an act of control, a final attempt to silence a chaos he cannot tolerate. So Freud tells us what he's running toward. Adler tells us what he's running from. Indeed, Alfred Adler split from Freud over a fundamental question: what actually drives human behavior? His answer wasn't sex or aggression. It was the striving for significance, the need to matter, to be heard, to count. When that need is blocked, when someone feels profoundly powerless, ignored, or dismissed, the compensation can become extreme. The smaller the wound, the bigger the monument built over it. Thanos' origin makes this explicit. He watched his planet die. He had a solution. Brutal, yes, but in his mind, logical. He proposed it. They called him mad, exiled him. And then Titan collapsed exactly as he'd said it would. He was right, and no one listened, and the world ended in fire. What Adler would say happens to a person after that is almost inevitable. The individual who experienced total powerlessness in one domain seeks absolute control in another. Thanos cannot save Titan, so he will save the universe. He cannot be heard on one world, so instead, he will make the cosmos obey. Every life he takes is a brick in the monument to his own vindication. I was right. I am necessary. I am the one who could do what others could not bear to. I am inevitable. This is the tragedy at the heart of the savior complex. The more certain you are that you're saving the world, the more likely you are to be trying to save yourself from the memory of the last time you failed. And here's where it gets genuinely uncomfortable, because Adler explains Thanos, but Fromm explains us. He explains why, when someone like Thanos appears, a part of us, a larger part than we'd like to admit, quietly wants to follow. Erich Fromm wrote Escape from Freedom in 1941, watching totalitarianism spread across Europe, trying to answer a question that haunted him: why do people surrender their freedom willingly to authoritarian figures? His answer was simple and devastating. Freedom is terrifying. To be free is to be responsible for your choices, to face genuine uncertainty, to live without guarantees. And that weight, for many people in many moments, is unbearable. So we escape. We submit to a leader, an ideology, a system that promises to remove the burden, that offers certainty in place of ambiguity, belonging in place of isolation, a clear enemy in place of a complex world. Thanos offers exactly this, a universe without moral ambiguity, a clean equation, half live, half die, balance restored, no debate, no compromise, no messy, exhausting negotiation with reality, just the brutal clarity of necessity.
I'm the only one with the will to act on it.
Fromm called this the authoritarian solution, the surrender of individual conscience to a higher will that claims to know the true good. And the reason it works, the reason it has always worked, is that the feeling it exploits is real. In moments of genuine overwhelm, most of us have had the thought, if someone would just take control, make the decision, bear the weight so I don't have to. Thanos is that someone. That is his seduction. Not evil, but just sweet relief. Let's take his argument apart properly.
This universe is finite, its resources finite. If life is left unchecked, life will cease to exist. It needs correction.
You don't know that!
I'm the only one who knows that.
On the surface, Malthusian logic. Population growth plus resource scarcity equals collapse. The math is real. Malthus wasn't wrong that unchecked growth creates pressure. The problem is the leap from diagnosis to solution. Why culling? Why not innovation, cooperation, redistribution, conservation? Why not the dozens of other responses that don't involve mass death? Because Thanos isn't solving a resource problem. He's enacting a moral fantasy. Lawrence Kohlberg mapped moral development in stages: pre-conventional reasoning, where you act based on personal benefit; conventional, where you follow society's rules; and post-conventional, where you act on universal principles even when they conflict with law. Thanos believes he's at the third stage. He transcends local morality. He acts on cosmic principle. But Kohlberg's test for genuine post-conventional morality is simple. Does your principle respect the dignity and autonomy of persons? Does it treat individuals as ends in themselves or as means to someone else's end? Thanos's principle reduces people to variables. It treats lives as quantities to be managed. He hasn't reached post-conventional morality. He's bypassed morality entirely and dressed power in the language of principle. Hannah Arendt, watching Adolf Eichmann's trial in 1961, noticed something that disturbed everyone who heard it. He wasn't a monster. He was mundane, bureaucratic. He hadn't hated the people he helped kill. He'd barely thought of them as people at all. They were a logistical problem to be processed. She called it the banality of evil. Atrocity committed not by rage, but by abstraction, by the refusal to think from the standpoint of another person. Thanos is Arendt's argument made cinematic. He doesn't hate the lives he erases. He barely registers them as individual lives. They don't even know what they've lost, he says of the snapped, revealing the distance. When people become half of all life rather than this specific mother, this specific child, this specific person, empathy shuts down. The moral imagination fails. Harm becomes hygiene. But there's one more dimension to this, the one that's hardest to look at, because the psychology of the savior complex doesn't just explain how Thanos treats the universe. It explains exactly how he treats the one person he claims to love most. Thanos loves Gamora. This is not in question. He weeps when he sacrifices her. The weight of grief is real. But watch what his love actually looks like in practice. He takes her from her family as a child, raises her as a weapon, shapes her entirely around his mission. When she resists, he manipulates. When she defies him, he breaks her. His love is genuine, and it is also total possession. Fromm drew a distinction that cuts right through this. Mature love affirms the other's freedom, their separate existence, their right to become something you didn't design. Immature love seeks to possess, to reshape, to bring the other into alignment with your own needs. Thanos' love is the latter, scaled to a universe. He loves existence the way he loves Gamora, genuinely and on his terms only. His care for the cosmos is real. His willingness to let the cosmos be something other than his vision of it is zero. This is the final mask of the savior complex. It mistakes control for care. It mistakes the intensity of its own feeling for the rightness of its actions. It says, "I'm doing this for you," and means it, while never once asking what you actually want. Now, understanding Thanos is not excusing him. Obviously, that needs to be said clearly. The body count is real. The ideology is monstrous. The outcome of the savior complex, historically, is always the same. Immense suffering, justified in advance, mourned, if at all, only afterward. But here's why it matters that we understand it. The savior complex isn't confined to purple aliens with infinity gauntlets. It appears whenever someone decides they know better than the people they're deciding for. It appears in institutions, in relationships, in politics, in the quiet certainty of people who are genuinely trying to help, but have stopped asking whether the people they're helping want what's being offered. Jung's instruction, "I'd rather be whole than good," is the antidote. Wholeness means integrating the shadow, not letting it drive. It means acknowledging the desire for control, the fear of chaos, the temptation to fix rather than to listen, and choosing, every time, to do the harder thing instead. Thanos had a real wound. Titan was real. The exile was real. The powerlessness was real. And he turned every bit of it into a weapon and called it a gift. That's not unique to him. That's the story of every self-appointed savior who ever burned something down in the name of making it better. Here's the question that actually matters. What would it have taken for Thanos to grieve Titan without turning the grief into a mandate? What safety? What being genuinely heard? What acknowledgement of the wound would have had to exist for him to put the gauntlet down? Because the savior complex doesn't begin with the snap. It begins in a moment when someone's pain was real and their solution was catastrophic, and no one in the room was paying enough attention to know the difference. That moment is not history. It is always, somewhere, right now,